And we're back for the news review right here on the AM show. So we'll be joined shortly by Executive Director, Media Foundation for West Africa, Sulemana Brima, who joins the conversation shortly. But we have a full house in terms of the papers, quite the stack, and we'll be getting into them shortly. But from the minority NDC's end, I'm talking about the minority in Parliament, quite a number of developments in recent times. Cletus Avoka apologizing to Arthur Forson, the NDC's chairman, Johnson Esiudun Ketia, now saying in London, in the United Kingdom, that, look, we have the majority of people within our party, at least those with the sort of interests that should be taken a look at, accenting to this and saying that it is the way to go. There may be dissenting opinions, but those who have assented to it, I should say, are more. Well, let's get into some of these conversations with Sulemana Brima, Executive Director, Media Foundation for West Africa. A very happy new year to you, Sulemana, and thank you so much for joining us this morning. I've missed you, actually.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. Happy New Year to you as well. And let's wish ourselves many, many, many returns of New Year's, but New Year's that are good with great prospects.
Let's look at your reflection on happening so far in this year. I mean, we've not had an interaction in this year so far, looking at the debt exchange program, how it's been handled, looking at all the different dynamics we're grappling with at this point in time in the year. In fact, recently I read about how Ghana's public debt stock has hit 93.5% of GDP, and even that was in November 2022. We've seen some improvement in terms of fuel prices. They could still be better. We've been told to expect some reductions further. But the major currencies, the hard currencies across the world, are gaining ground again against our Ghana cedi. Any very quick reflections before we move on?
Well, we are just still within the first month of the year, and already so many developments have happened. The government has continued the conversations around the domestic bond exchange, the restructuring of the economic issues. We've seen, as you were talking about, this reshuffle by the NDC of its parliamentary caucus. We have had the very scandalous audit report by the Auditor General into the expenditure of COVID-19 funds. We are seeing so much around the National Cathedral. And at this stage, I think that the job of the National Cathedral board and those who have been handling it, the real job now is how to cover that pit, because I don't foresee any cathedral being built with all the scandals that are coming up, and men of God who really want to stay to their conscience, asking their colleagues to even resign and allow for investigations to be conducted into various expenses into the cathedral project. I think the real job now is how to cover that massive pit that was, excavated at the site. And then, of course, we've heard about gold for oil, and at some point we were told that once it kicks in, we'll be buying fuel in single digits. We were told that the first consignment was in about 2 weeks or so ago. Fuel prices are still where they were. So quite a lot have happened already, and we can only look forward to what we as citizens can do to ensure that the right things are done. This morning, we are, learning about the fraudulent activities within the computerized school placement system.
And I was about to get to that, but since you started off on it, let's go ahead.
And then, of course, JoyNews did a fantastic work on the plight of kids in the Northeast region, I suppose.
Ghana's schools of shame. Is that what you're referencing?
We had a very, very embarrassing
So that's
comment
actually,
from the
pardon my
Minister for
interjection, that's
Education.
the Pandai district of the northern region.
Yes, and we had a very embarrassing comment from our Minister for Education, Osei Chum, talking about those schools as schools of fame and not schools of shame. And I was deeply embarrassed that the minister in charge of education wasn't really ashamed by what he was seeing and embarrassed by it, and rather would describe these schools the way he did and
You,
the
you, you,
kids.
you actually posted on Twitter your embarrassment and asked whether he would send one of his children or grandchildren to those so-called schools of fame. I saw your tweet.
Exactly. Exactly. So, well, these are the leaders we have. And as I said this morning, we'll get the revelations around the fraudulent activities in the computerized school selection, placement and selection process. And so a lot is already happening. And it means that we have a lot to do.
We do have a whole lot to do. And of course, that discussion that you've made mention of today, we're getting into it. We're going to slice and dice and get to the bottom of that investigative report. But Mr. Brahma, with your permission, let's get into the papers this morning. The Daily Graphic, stop $88 billion illegal outflow from Africa, Akufo-Addo urges states. There's also commemorative stamps. Ghana Post expresses gratitude to Otumfuo. You remember that situation. There's also GES cautions public over cash for placement. That is SHS placement. And there is also this very interesting one. Policeman service rifle leaves service rifle in Trotro. This one really got me. I was just thinking, how does that even happen? But let's start with the banner headline. Stop $88 billion illegal outflow from Africa, Akufo-Addo urges states. And President Akufo-Addo has called on African nations to collaborate and institute stringent measures to stem the disturbing annual illicit outflows of $88 billion from the continent. He said stern attention was required to arrest the situation immediately because the phenomenon was depriving Africa of significant resources that could be used to support its development agenda. President Akufo-Addo made the call when he addressed the closing ceremony of the three-day African Prosperity Dialogues, the APD for short, at the Pidiasi Presidential Lodge in the Eastern Region last Saturday. Quoting him, he says, "We need to pay serious attention to and arrest illicit financial outflows out of the continent, which are estimated at about $88 billion annually, depriving Africa of significant resources that could be used to support our development agenda," he said. "We need concrete measures to stop the systemic impoverishment of our continent and the theft of its resources," the president said. But putting that side by side with our own wastefulness. We all know Ghana loses some $4 to $6 billion every year on the back of corruption. The finance ministry itself, at a point in time, put out a figure of about $4 billion in reflection of how much we lose. You were referencing the Auditor General's report. We see all the rot in the system. We see how we have used COVID-19 funds and how there are so many dislocated reports. What does that mean vis-a-vis what the president is saying?
Well, I think the president is talking about a very, very important issue on the continent and in Ghana for that matter, illicit financial flows. It is a matter that has gained global attention as something that has to be dealt with if we have to keep African economies strong and thriving. And as he said, if we are losing about 88 billion annually, and I think that is even a low figure because statistics from World Bank and other institutions point to a much more higher figure around, some 200, 300 billion dollars annually from Africa that we goes through illicit financial flows. So it's a matter that is so important. Around December, we had a public forum that featured the Economic and Organized Crime Office, and they highlighted quite very, very troubling developments where, for example, you have huge disparities between the export of mineral resources and how much we get into the country, and so on and so forth. And these are through tax evasions, through money laundering, and other illicit activities. So that's really an important matter to deal with. But as we've said, even if these monies were not going, how would we use them? Because within a space of 2.5 years or so, we had about um, maybe more than $3 billion equivalent coming into the country to support our fight against COVID. And certainly, Ghana wasn't among the countries that was in distress in terms of COVID. Yes, we all needed to prepare and all of that, but I don't think that Ghana did anything extraordinary to say that, oh, yes, we fought COVID, as government would want us to believe. Because the numbers in Ghana in terms of the death toll, if you look at other countries, Togo, less than 1,000, Cote d'Ivoire, less than 1,000, Burkina Faso, with all the challenges, less than 1,000, Mali, less than 1,000 in terms of official figures. So, and we had about 1,000 plus deaths from COVID. And then, of course, even in terms of infections, I don't think
but in that instance, you would also want to look at the different population sizes. And we're pretty much larger in terms of population than Togo, for example.
Yeah, but if you were to make that analogy, then you would say that Nigeria,
Right.
Nigeria is over 200 million people, and so that's about times six or more of Ghana's population. And so, if it was really about what extraordinary work that government did, that is what helped us to have far less casualties. Then how about Nigeria? I don't think that Nigeria had six times or so the number of COVID deaths that we experienced. And so I don't see anything that will say extraordinary about what we did. Yes, we put in measures and all of that. But the monies that came in, as the audit report has revealed, we basically embezzled it. We haven't seen any transformation in our health infrastructure. There are regions in our country that still don't have ventilators, even though we knew that was a critical thing to have in the combat against COVID. And so, yes, I agree with the president that illicit financial flows is something that we should deal with. But again, how does it happen? It's through these same politicians, through companies that are linked with politicians, companies with influence that take out these monies. And so a lot will depend on the president himself in terms of our situation in Ghana in trying to stem the tide when it comes to illicit financial flows. And that's what I would say to that.
Let's get into some other stories from that paper. And there is that big one, of course, on page 16. But let's take a look at that one and then move on to talk education for a bit. So, policeman leaves service rifle in Trotro in quotation marks. Now, a police inspector has been interdicted for negligently leaving his rifle in a commercial vehicle. The policeman, identified as Inspector Suleimana, unfortunately, he bears your name, Suleimana Adam, who was stationed at the Rapid Deployment Force Takrady, allegedly forgot his weapon on the front seat of the Toyota Haze minibus. Quote, the police administration has interdicted the police officer for negligently leaving a service rifle in a commercial vehicle. A police statement signed by the head of Public Affairs Unit, Western Regional Police Command, Superintendent Olivia E.T. Adiku, confirmed. The rifle, according to the police, was returned by the driver of the said vehicle. That's a citizen right there, not a spectator. Quote, who also alleged that the inspector had extorted money from him. The release confirming the interdiction indicated that both Inspector Adam and the driver were assisting with investigations. It goes on with other details, but I feel this suffices for our discussion. Can you imagine this?
Oh, it's a terrible situation. I don't know how that can happen. I don't know how a police officer and his inspector. Inspector is not, even though he's within the junior ranks, but that's the topmost of the junior ranks. And the person must have had considerable experience being in the service, depending on the entry point. And I suppose he is somebody who wouldn't be less than 10 to 15 years in the service. So one wonders how this would happen. What could have gone wrong? Of course, commendations to the driver who acted the right way. But it also perhaps should begin to also raise the point about how weapons are, brandished and handled by our officers of our security agencies anywhere, anyhow. Should we be getting to a point where it's not even possible for a police officer to be wielding AK-47 in a public bus? It's something that is important we look at. Must it be allowed? That a police officer with AK-47 will be boarding a public bus or a public transport facility. So, for me, the fundamental question is, why would a police officer really forget about his weapon in a vehicle like that? And well, it's perhaps good that the interdiction has happened for investigations to go on, but they should look beyond the professional requirement of the police officer, the discipline and all of that, and also look within the police service and say, what steps must we take to avoid some of these things? Because we are dealing with human beings who once in a while may, assuming the driver did not return it, we'll be talking about...
In fact, the driver says, quote, "I woke up in the morning to find the rifle on the floor of the front passenger seat. I got scared, but later remembered that it might be for the police officer who arrested me last Friday night." So, I mean, if these were some nefarious characters, and who knows, he could have even been innocent if it had gone missing, because someone else could have seen it and taken it, some other, nefarious character, and whom would we have blamed? So this is terrible on so many fronts.
Yeah. So I mean, the conduct of the police officer has to be investigated, but I think that it's also important. There's a look into the handling of weapons in public spaces, because you go out there, you don't see police officers wielding these assault rifles all over. Maybe a sidearm, a small weapon, a pistol, and so on. And it doesn't make them less safe. But in our system, I don't know whether it's because we don't have as much as they have in terms of sidearms and all of that. But you see AK-47 in traffic, when you stop at the traffic lights and all of that, you wonder what is happening. So yes, we need to investigate what would have happened to Oga to leave his AK-47 or whatever rifle it is in the car. But it's time to also then use this to interrogate the way in which officers, are given weapons to handle in public spaces.
Some other stories very quickly. In fact, on that same page of the Daily Graphic, Mahama, that is the former president, backs foreign minister's Commonwealth dream. And the former president, John Mahama, has said he would support Ghana's foreign minister, Shirley Ayoko Botchwey, in her bid to contest as Secretary General of the Commonwealth. Ms. Botchwey is hoping to succeed Dominica's Patricia Scotland, who completes her tenure at the end of 2023. And I think that's a positive move. There's also, on page 23, cocoa farmers refute Al Jazeera report on child labor. I'm sure you followed that and how they are saying they were set up. In fact, when we aired that story some days or weeks ago, they made mention of the fact that these Al Jazeera reporters had come into their community and coaxed them into bringing their children to the farm. And next thing you know, there's a story that, look, they are using their children for labor or child labor. We've spoken to some, analysts on that, or those in the child rights groupings, and they have said, look, it could be here or there. Maybe in this instance they were tricked, but sometimes the real thing does happen. And just to wrap, so from Mahama's support, the cocoa farmers and that Al Jazeera report, the middle spread of the newspaper will support banks to deal with domestic debt challenges. That's the governor of the Bank of Ghana. But the Catholic Bishops' Conference says, find less burdensome solutions to DDEP. Quoting them, the strong resistance to the debt restructuring from domestic resources to meet the IMF bailout conditions is a natural response from those directly or indirectly affected. I've heard Martin Kpebu suggest that individual bondholders are going to be exempted. Quick reflections on these three as we move on.
Well, the cocoa story in terms of child labor, It's something that I really think that I'm on the side of the farmers. I grew up um, in a village with parents who were cocoa farm caretakers, and have been. I mean, throughout my childhood, I am a son of a cocoa farm caretaker. And so, in terms of being involved in cocoa farming activities, I would say that throughout my childhood I did. But here I am. I went to school and I was taken care of by the same parents. I think sometimes we misconstrue the whole thing about helping parents in the farms to be child labor. And I don't think that it is. Yes, there may be instances where some parents would use their kids for farming activities and for activities that are really beyond the physical capabilities of the children. And certainly that will be straying into the arena of child labor. But to a large extent, what happens is that over the weekend, you are there to help your parents, or you come back from school and you are asked to go help your parents in the farm. But that's what the parents are doing. If that parent was a shop owner, you come back from school and you go and sit at the shop, and nobody would take that to be child labor. So I think sometimes the westernized idea of what constitutes child labor is what um, gives us all these problems. And on that score, I'm on the side of the farmers. I'm not saying that child labor doesn't happen; it happens,
Right.
but sometimes it is misinterpreted. President Mahama saying he would support Honorable Shelley Ayoko Botwe for the Commonwealth Secretary General position if she wants to try it. I think it is a commendable thing, and it's not. It's something that we've been doing so well in as a country. Currently, the former Foreign Minister Hannah Tete is working within the UN system. And that we all know is an appointment that would have required the support and endorsement of the government of, where that person comes from. And that then is the MPP government because she got into those roles when the MDC exited. And certainly she would have required endorsement and support by the Kufuor government. And so I believe it is something that we've been doing so well in when it comes to international assignments. We go beyond the petty politics that we have in our country, and so that's commendable on the part of the former president. And if she decides to go, I mean, the honorable foreign minister, we wish her a better luck, and we all pray for her to succeed.
And that's the very reason I highlighted that, because NDC or NPP, at least when it comes to that, it appears once it's not local and it's international, we'll give you all the support. You remember Ibn Chambers and his time even. All of that has happened. But once it's local, then the buga starts. But at least on the international front, we're doing something good. I just want to wrap with the Daily Graphic, so we quickly move to other papers. GES cautions public over cash for SHS placement, and the Ghana Education Service has cautioned the public to report persons who approach them to pay money for placement into any senior high schools to the police. The GES, in a statement dated January 29, 2023, and signed by the head of the Public Relations Unit, Cassandra Chumampofu, announced that preparations were ongoing for the release of the computerized school selection and placement system for the 2023 and 2024 academic year. It further urged the public to beware of fake news portals and instead follow the GES official social media handles. That's the latest there. I don't know whether you would like to top up, especially on the back of that latest exploration by the Fourth Estate.
Well, certainly these statements, yesterday I think I read a statement from the Ministry of Education and then also one from GS. And certainly those statements were issued as a panic reaction statements because they are aware that this morning the Fourth Estate, or today the Fourth Estate, is releasing the investigations into the fraudulent activities within the school placement system. So it's basically a way of reacting preemptively and proactively even before the publication comes, and to see if that could be a way of dousing whatever the impact of the investigations would be. But I can assure you the story has already been published. and people can go onto the Fourth Estate website and read, and you can watch the documentary via the Fourth Estate's YouTube channel. Later on in the day, JoyNews would also be telecasting the documentary, and it's quite revealing.
In
It's
fact,
one
right on this
thing.
show, we'll be bringing our viewers snippets of that.
Great. It's one thing having people pose as criminals, and another having people pose as criminals and still be able to execute whatever they promise that they would do. And in this case, that is what the situation is. If you have people who are cleaners, able to effect changes, then you know that they are not really the persons behind the whole scheme. They are dealing with big bosses. And as the investigations reveal, in terms of category A schools, we are told that it is only the minister and the director general of the GES who have access to make placements and effect changes. So if somebody then was able to take money and made sure that a change was made, we need to get answers as to how that was possible. If indeed it is only the Minister for Education and the Director General of the GS who have access to make placement in those schools. So once the documentary is released and people watch it, I believe what the next thing will be to demand answers from the Minister for Education, Honorable Osei Educhum, how those placements were made in those category A schools, if he and the Director General are the only people who have access to effect those changes. So I think at this stage, I will say fingers crossed. I will urge the public to go onto the website of the Fourth Estate to read the story and to watch the documentary. And then by evening and tomorrow, we can have a conversation and seek answers from Honorable Educhum why these things.
On the back page of the Daily Graphic, of course, we get wind of the fact that we lost 2-0 to Niger in the Chan, and we're out of that tournament. Sad, because on the back of the warm-up in Egypt and all the dynamics, I was expecting more from our boys, but that failure in the first match and capitulating to Niger means we are out, and they will be playing, I think, Algeria in Oran. We wish them the best. I mean, in life, you lose sometimes, and when you lose, you can only be charitable and wish your opponent the best. We move on to the Ghanaian Times newspaper. Domestic debt exchange program. Government to announce new deal today as deadline for voluntary individual bondholder participation ends tomorrow. I'll bring you snippets of that story. Attorney General touts Ghana's strong human rights record at UN Geneva Confab. There's also ex-President Mahama advocates reinstitution, extension of debt services initiative for debt-strapped countries. We've been talking about the Paris Club engaging the G20, among others, for some debt relief. And then illicit drugs trade depriving Africa of resources and development. That's according to President Akufo-Addo. But let's just do that story on page 12. Government to announce new deal today as deadline for voluntary individual bondholder participation ends tomorrow. And the Ministry of Finance will today announce a new package for individual bondholders under the DDE program. A highly placed source familiar with the arrangement has told the Ghanaian Times. Although details of the new deal were not revealed, the source said the offer would be in line with the government's agenda to restructure its debt to a sustainable level in order to seal the International Monetary Fund deal. It described as inaccurate a statement by Martin Kpebu, convener of the Individual Bondholders Forum, that the ministry had agreed to exempt the individual bondholders from the DDE, which deadline expires tomorrow. Any quick reflections?
Well, it's good that we are seeing some progress in this endeavor, because we've basically been caught up in a trap. And we have no choice but to implement some of these tough decisions. The only problem is that I think the finance minister, Mr. Ken Ofori-Atta, is managing the economy of Ghana with a mindset of managing data bank. I think he has a view that whatever he thinks and gets approval from cabinet, just as whatever he thought and gets approval from his management at Data Bank at the time is what it is. I think he sometimes forgets that he is managing the public purse of Ghana and not the purse of his private entity. And so certain decisions are always made and announced as if it is like a private entity dealing with clients. And that is why when you take e-levy, for example, it was just announced, thinking that, oh, well, we just do it. This is what we want to do, we just do it. Without, thinking about what the public would think, the public reaction, the consequences on the public interest. And so then there was a backlash. In this particular case, it's the same thing. The government basically announces something, a policy, Furiata announces it. Even banks say, look, we don't know what this means. The insurance entity say, we don't know what this means. Bondholders, we don't understand what the government wants to do. And yet the government says, oh, this is something that we are implementing. This can only come from somebody who is thinking, whose mindset is just like managing a private entity, like maybe when he was head of data bank those days. But I think that he needs to reorient himself and appreciate the fact that, look, he's managing the public purse. It is not his bank. It is not his private entity. And so for any major decision that has significant implications on people, it is important that those people are engaged, the stakeholders are engaged, discussions held, understanding reached,
Right.
before decisions are made. And that is why we get ourselves into all these policy credibility challenges. Because you announce it and people come up to challenge it, and then there's a whole debate, and at the end of the day, the entire credibility of the policy suffers. And when that happens, we get ourselves into this situation that we are in. It's unfortunate that they've run the economy aground. And I always say that they started by collapsing banks, and now, towards the end, the economy is collapsed, and we have to find a way of reviving it. And it takes painful decisions, such as what we are going through now. And even now, as you are saying, even though the individual bondholders in the engagements are of the view that the conclusion was that individual bondholders can be exempted. If you are not interested, you can be exempted from the process. And now, from the statement, they are saying, no, that's false. That was not it. That the government said it was going to exempt individual bondholders. So there's still issues about the consensus and the common understanding of what government wants to do.
Right.
And that government and the finance ministry in particular needs to up its game in terms of thinking and orienting itself that whatever they are managing belongs to the people, and the people must always understand whatever they want to do and buy into whatever they want to do before they.
We have to wrap the conversation in just about a minute and a half. I'll take just a few stories and leave you to dilate on them. The Daily Guide, don't jail me, Atuesian begs court. I'm bringing it up because we've had conversations on this. Now, founder of the defunct Capital Bank, William Atuesian, is reportedly pleading with the court not to put him behind bars if he is unable to pay some 20 million Ghana cedis to the state by April the 28th, 2023. In a fresh document filed by his lawyers challenging the December 13, 2022 decision of the High Court presided over by Justice Eric J. Bafo, Mr. Essien asked to be given an opportunity to explain why he could default. Mr. Essien is required to pay, remember, 90 million Ghana cedis as restitution and reparation to the state within 1 year. He has already paid 30 million Ghana cedis and is expected to refund the remaining 60 million in 3 installments, 20 million to the state latest by April 28, 2023, failure of which he would be jailed. And you remember what the AG said, oh, and let's do this, and then if they fail, I think it was the deputy AG, Tia Yeboah. There's domestic debt exchange gathers momentum as 3 institutional bondholders join. That's in the Finder newspaper. The Ghanaian publisher, NDC Minority Reshuffle lacks common sense. That's according to, guess who? Kwesi Pratt. And to wrap the conversation up, well, there's this one as well in the New Crusading Guide. Land guards on rampage at Otano. But the BNFT, poultry industry woes deepen. Feed accounts for 70% of production cost, 80% of farmers in Accra out of business. And this resonates with what the association has been telling us. And then again, consensus on debt exchange to spur CD's stability. I'd like you to reflect on one or two in some 30 seconds, if need be.
Well, I think that it's for the Atuesian matter, because it's before court now, it's difficult to comment on. We look forward to what the decision of the courts would be. The poultry industry, I have friends who ventured into it and eventually have had their business, I mean, have had to fold up their businesses because, as one of them would say, look, the cost of feeding the animals is far more than whatever is being generated from the enterprise, and so had to be closed. And yet we have an agric minister who says that he's done so well that Ghanaians should give him, or the party should give him the chance to
Well,
become
he's no longer at post. So
Yes, but I mean, of course, whilst he was there, he touted his own credentials and was always of the view that, look, I've done so well.
right,
A minister who had to at some point then create a market at the ministry in order for people to get a food at a certain price.
right.
Still think he did quite well. So yeah, the poultry industry has been struggling for some time now, and it would be great if some attention is given to that sector,
Mm.
because one of the problems is the level of importation, and poultry products are among the commodities that we really import in huge quantities, and that affects our city. And so, if government is talking about the Goggisberg economy, trying to reduce imports and all of that, that's a key sector
Right.
to. And I'm hoping that as we go through all these crises with our economy, there could still be a way of dealing with issues in that sector.
Suleimana, thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's really, really refreshing having you for the first time this year. And do have a wonderful day, sir.
You too.
Suleimana Brima, Executive Director, Media Foundation for West Africa. Right before we get into sports, congratulations to the CEO of Koba, Nelson Koshi Dasegla, for winning the FinTech Personality of the Year award at the Ghana FinTech Awards 2022. We salute you, sir. On that note, let's settle for sports.